Welcome. This is Ryan Sadam, Director of Operations and co-founder at Client Feedback Tool. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy day to learn more about some incredible tips for improving your communication. A little bit of housekeeping before we get started. Those of you who may be new to the GoToWebinar platform, if the control panel controlling the webinar is in the way, you'll see it on the top right hand of your screen. And John, if you'll go to the next slide, that would be great. If you need to hide the control panel, you can click on the right arrow in the control panel, and from there you can hide the window. You'll also see there is a question dialog, and inside of that you may pose any questions. I know John will be pausing a couple of times during the presentation today to ask or to answer any questions. So please feel free to pose those as soon as you are ready. Any questions we don't answer during the presentation, we will present to John, and he will take time to answer them at the end. Speaking of, our speaker today is John Doehring. John is one of my favorite speakers. He's an author and a management consultant. John founded J. Doehring & Company, and he and his colleagues provide advice and counsel on business strategy, planning, marketing, growth, and profitable operations. John works with clients large to small, broadly diversified to niche specialists around the world to around the block. What he has to share today is gleaned from that experience and is broadly applicable to each one of you. John's real focus with clients, his mission, is to help plan for the future, grow their business, and ultimately make more money. You will find great techniques in the presentation today to do each one of these things. As another note, John's first book will be published this fall, Fast Future, 10 Uber Trends Changing Everything in the Business. It's designed to help business owners, entrepreneurs, and professionals understand the future ahead and plan for growth, profit, and sustainable success. At this time, I would like to turn it over to John and welcome all of you. Again, please ask your questions in the question box on the side, and we will be answering those at various points throughout the presentation. All right, John, take it away.
Ryan, thank you. And hello, everyone. Good afternoon. And welcome to the 10 top tips of totally terrific communicators. And by the way, happy National Tequila Day for those of you for whom that information might be important. Our presentation today is not really going to be the importance of effective communications, one of those sorts of talks, at least per se. You already know that. And so instead, what I have endeavored to do is to provide you with 10 really useful ideas, I think, tactics, actionable steps that you can take in your organization to make communications more effective and more successful in your firm. Our presentation is divided into 3 parts. First, I want to paint a picture with you a little bit about sort of the context of business today, the lay of the land, if you will, around us, and try to make the connection between that picture and why I think communication is so critical in our organizations. Then we will rifle through the 10 top tips moving really quickly. I've got lots of information I want to share with you today. And we'll end talking a little bit about execution, about taking action, and how important that is to achieve the kind of extraordinary results that I know you're after. So let's jump right into things today. Let me start by saying that we're often in our organizations looking for a magic bullet, sort of a super direct way to be successful, and we usually don't find that. But it is my belief that communication is as close as it comes. That is, communication is, I think, the real competitive differentiator today. It is the real magic bullet, if you will. It's that important. But it is a question of intensity, because all of us are communicating, and we're communicating all of the time, and sometimes really effectively and sometimes not. But let me just kind of explain this here. When you come to a presentation like this, and when we think about communication together, what we are doing is we're trying to figure out how to get better at it. And so our goal, our implicit goal, is that we are, a professional or a professional firm that is getting better at communications and ultimately at doing communications well. That makes sense. So you're an engineering firm, an architecture firm, a dentist, a lawyer, and what you're trying to do is get better at communication. That's what about 95% or more of organizations think. Very rarely and very infrequently, there are companies taking this notion to the next step, the next level. And it's a bit heretical, or it's really out there. But think about what it would look like if you put communications at the center of your organization. What if communication and collaboration together was indeed your core strength, your core competency, to the point where communications was what you did, and your profession, your discipline, is just what you were talking about. That's putting communications right at the center. And as I say, not very many organizations today are thinking about it that way, but there is, I believe, a real competitive differentiator. I'll ask you, what holds you back from improving communications as an individual, as an organization? And it's kind of a rhetorical question, but I've asked this question to hundreds of professionals in hundreds of audiences, and I know what you would say. What you would say are the same things that I would say. What holds me back from getting better in my business? It's the lack of resources, the lack of time, the other priorities, sometimes the lack of skill of knowing what and how to do it. But mostly it's, where do you find the time to do this kind of stuff? And me and my team are busy doing other things. That's typically what holds us back. But when we step back and think about that for a moment, you know that those are perceptional constraints that we give ourselves, that we put in place. And many of those we have a lot of control to change. So fundamentally, what holds us back from being better communicators is that it isn't important enough for us to do so. I don't know about you, but I bet it's true for you, as it is for me, that in my life I've found I can do almost all of the things that I decide are the most important. And so what holds us back is often our own self. So let's talk then again about this sort of lay of the land. What is going on around us? And in a word, to me, it's change. Constant, nonstop, accelerating change. We have a changing world, and you know a lot about a lot of these uber trends that are transforming our business and our society and our world, because you and I are living in these these contexts. So we know about information and knowledge and how it's not only becoming much more available, but it's frankly overwhelming all of us. That technology is changing everything, and that change is accelerating, that we are globalizing almost all corners and nooks and crannies of everything in our markets, that we're rapidly moving away, I think, from a world where success was a measure of kind of who you are and where you're from, to one that will be much more merit-based. What can you do for me? What can you accomplish? Doesn't matter who you are or where you are. Marketing is transformed in our world as consumer power grows by leaps and bounds every day. Small firms are able to ascend to the global stage the way they never have before because of technology and information. We have completely disassociated, even atomized supply chains. Everything is sort of breaking and reforming in different ways. Diversity is not only an opportunity, but a competitive advantage for many organizations. We have social connectivity in all kinds of new ways, and new communities are forming. Again, near constant change. This is the world that I see around us, what I call the fast future. And again, we know a lot about those trends because we're living at them, but unless you're paying very, very close attention, then it's hard to keep up. The change is happening faster than our ability to comprehend. That's why I call it the fast future. Some futurists like Ray Kurzweil talk about a period of time not far from now, out in the mid-century, that's only 30 or 40 years away, where the rate of technological change will be so fast and accelerating so fast that it will become beyond the capacity of human beings to even acknowledge and understand it. It sounds like science fiction, but maybe in our generation or the next generation, according to Kurzweil and the singularitarians, these will be the last generation before a sort of functional immortality, ability to live way, way longer than we do now. Why do I say all of that? Because I believe my worldview is the context of change around us is so important. That is, what is coming will be so much different than where we've come from that implies to me that we must change the way we think about and run our businesses. Everything is melting around us, or as Yogi Berra once said, the future ain't what it used to be. So my question to you in thinking about this context is, how do you see it? And if you see it like I do, are you ready for the fast future that is ahead? Sally, do we have any questions yet? This is a stopping point.
Sorry for that delay, John. Yes, we do actually.
I'm going to.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
Okay. So we do have a question. The person says, I agree with you that the world is changing and the future may be uncertain and a little scary, but what's the tie between that changing future and communication?
Yeah, okay. Okay. Well, see, as I sort of share my thoughts and approach to growth and profit and success in organizations, I often run into senior leaders of organizations and firms who disagree somewhat, and that's okay, who have a different worldview. And that's more along the lines of, this is just a part of the cycle, the continuing kind of up and down. We've been here before. We've seen recessions like this. We've survived this kind of stuff in the past, that sort of thing. And so I'm okay with that. Frankly, I think you and I are each entitled to our worldviews. I'm not okay with not having a worldview. I think that's dangerous and risky. But if you see accelerating change in a much different future than our past, then I think it really does, as I said a minute ago, it sort of suggests that I need to be doing things a lot differently in my business to be successful. That is, the same sort of old ways of doing business are less likely to be successful in the future. And communication is kind of right at the center of that. Let me just take another minute to kind of paint that picture further. Imagine, let me think. So imagine for a minute that you were kind of back at the high school dance. So get this picture of this uncomfortable situation. You're at the high school dance. All the boys are on one side, all the girls are on one side, and you're kind of looking across the court. Remember this? To kind of find somebody in the crowd that you can sort of hook up with and dance to. You're waiting for somebody to make a first step. And so in that kind of a marketplace, if you will, everybody is sort of equal. But what if some of the people were to start yelling and screaming, pick me, pick me, pick me? They would get the attention of the other side. Or maybe they would ask even, or offer even more value. Pick me and I'll give you money. Pick me and I'll marry you. Pick me and I'll fall in love with you. Sorry for the analogy, but think about this sort of metaphor. And then all of a sudden a big jumbotron screen were to open up, and now you would have people all around the world competing for your attention. Well, that's kind of silly, but my point is we are moving, I think, rapidly from a history and a legacy where our marketplaces were very local and very connected, and you and I got work because of where we sat and the relationships we had, and that is all breaking apart, all disrupting, and we can no longer, I think, rely on simply doing things, communicating, and I'm going to get into kind of the various ways I think about communication in those same old ways. So that is my thought there. The communication is, if you will, one of the core vehicles to help us connect with opportunity in business in the fast future ahead. Do you have others, Sally?
That's what I've got for right now.
Okay, let me then bore in a little bit more and talk about communication. So now, I'm talking about a specific kind, as you probably expected: active, engaged, listening-oriented, two-way, facilitating, conversational, relationship-oriented, process-oriented. That kind of communication, not frankly the kind that you're experiencing right now, where I'm just talking at you. Unfortunately, we can't have the kind of really good facilitated two-way conversation that we could if we were all sitting together. But I'm talking about a special kind of communication that is two-way, active, engaged, and process-oriented. Now, I bet you, like I, have been in situations many times in your life where the expectation around communication was really, really different. So you're with your spouse or significant other, and they're saying, you're not really communicating with me, and what you're thinking is, what do you mean? You know, I'm communicating with you right now, but the different types, the kind of, that sort of Venus and Mars cliche about how we think about communication differently. So we're really going to talk about, keep that in mind today. That's the kind of communication I'm talking about, or this kind of caring, because people they don't care what you know until they know that you care, that there's investment in a relationship. That's the kind of communication. So let's jump right in now, if you will, and start talking about 10 tips. Here's my first one, the huddle. My tip for you is to have a huddle in your organization, that is to meet with your team every single day for 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 15 minutes. Now, I hope in some sense that your gut instinct about that is, that's ridiculous, because I don't think very many teams do this. But so let's think about, as an analogy, as a metaphor, let's think about American football for a minute. Not the kind of football we've all been watching on TV, but American football. And you know that in this game, in American football, it is, I think, really, really different than our business. Football is a very structured kind of situation and system. Think with me for a minute. There are outlines around the field. There are jerseys for each team, so you know who's on your team and who's on the other team, the good guys and the bad guys. There's very high role clarity in the football game. That is, people know what they do, what their role is, and they know what other people do. In fact, you wear jerseys with numbers on it so that people can kind of keep that clear. You with me? Very high definition. The vision in football is straightforward and clear. The mission is clear. There are positive rewards and negative rewards and consequences for certain activities. So football is like that. Business is very different, I think. Very much more loosey, very much more gray rather than black and white. Role clarity is often very confused and sort of low. People don't know what the others are doing, how it all fits together, what the mission is. You see my picture here. So football very structured, business not very structured. And yet, and here's kind of the punchline of that, in football, almost every single organization decides that it is valuable to have a meeting before every single play. Now, why is it they do that? What happens in that meeting? You know, it's making sure everybody's on the same page. Everybody knows what we're going to do. Everybody is reminded that they're on the team, that they're in this together, that there's something bigger than themselves. You with me? The huddle Could you take that concept and make that work in your team? Investing in other people, empathizing, making sure people have the tools they need to be successful just today. That's tip number 1, the huddle. Tip number 2, re-engineer the weekly meeting. Now, I bet virtually everybody on the line works in an organization that has a weekly meeting. Very, very common in the professional world across all kinds of different disciplines. And this is a meeting that typically is involved with or is about looking at active projects. So a project management meeting and or a weekly sales meeting. You almost all are in that. And I hope you don't have one of these kinds of meetings where everybody's either at each other's throat or everybody's asleep. But I got to tell you, I've been involved in lots of these with lots of different organizations over the years, both as an employee and as a consultant. And folks, they're awful. They are awful. And the question is, why? Why don't they look like this? Why don't they look like this? We used to hate meetings till we figured out how to have fun, how to have one in a hot tub. The key to re-engineering your weekly meeting so that it is a truly effective communication platform is to step back and think about what it is you're trying to do, to look at purpose, to look at these other things. Venue, length, most of them should be a lot shorter. Focus, most of them ought to have an agenda and have a laser focus. Who's coming? Who's not coming? What is the attitude? How does it feel? What are our objectives? It's pretty straightforward stuff, but I expect that many of you work in organizations where you are, you just have an ineffective meeting and you're wasting time. Now, it might not surprise you to hear me say it, but I'm a firm believer that most organizations need to have more meetings, not less. Did you hear that? More meetings, not less. But they need to be shorter. They need to be a lot more focused. You need to re-engineer. That means tear it all down and build it back up the way it should be. And don't lose sight of the fun thing. When we get people together in meetings like this, it's about teams. It's about collaboration. And we have more than 50, 75 years of robust research about how groups behave and how they develop from the field of psychology. It's very kind of predictable ways. And you've seen these models before, right? This forming, storming, norming, performing kind of idea. It takes time and process and investment to build a real team. And you can see that the foundation there is trust. That is one of the reasons why so many organizations suffer from ineffective communications and ineffective operations, the lack of trust. We're unwilling to share and collaborate like we should because there are these kinds of problems going on in our organization. David Maister said in his book, The Trusted Advisor, that this kind of trust equation exists, where trust is positively correlated with credibility, that is, your ability to do something, reliability, that is your ability to follow through and get it done, and intimacy, that's a word you don't hear very often in the organization context, but this investment in one another, in building relationship and building friendship, and caring and empathizing. Trust is positively correlated with those three and inversely correlated with self-orientation. So the more effort and energy I'm putting into paying attention to myself and my own self-interest, the less trust I'm building with you. Just some thoughts as you think about re-engineering that weekly meeting. This sort of thing takes leadership, positive leadership in teams. And look at this list of names, thinking about leadership this way. The facilitator, the coach, the mentor, the trainer, the communicator, the problem solver. Is this what your list of leadership attributes looks like? Descriptives, motivator, empower, the servant. what I really want to ask you to think about is, and you probably look at that list and think, yeah, I get that. That's what leadership is about. That's where the value is. But now I want you to slam that hard up against this notion that is so prevalent in firms like yours that says or implies that all of the value here, all of the things that we do are valuable, are measured by utilization. So you get that, right? In the organization that says, if it is of value, then we bill it to the client. Now go back and look at this list again and see, does that work and make sense? They're not mutually exclusive. I don't mean to say that. It's just that we often think about them that way. That is, we don't have time to be this kind of leader with our team because we're too busy, investing in getting these client projects out the door. Does that make sense when you think about it that way with me? Okay, tip number 3. If you have a weekly meeting, you probably also have something on a monthly cycle too. The monthly review tends to be financial and operationally oriented if your organization has one at all. That's usually where employees learn what they learn about how the company is doing. And I have to say that in my experience, many of these are pretty awful as well. I'm going to give you 2 suggestions about how to make the monthly review meeting more effective. Number 1, open the books. Open the books. Share the information with your staff. Pretty simple. Here's what's happening. Here's what's not happening. Here's what it means to you and me and us. So many companies I've worked with over the years want to share just a part of the information, maybe just the good stuff and not the bad. Maybe some of what's going on, but not a lot of some of the things they don't think they need to know. But here's the problem with that. When you don't share information with me, I make up my own answers in the vacuum. And that's what happens in your firm. When you don't share with employees, they figure it out. They make up their own stories to fill the vacuum of space. And in almost all cases, the story that employees, that staff come up with themselves is worse than reality. That is the nature of humanity. That is entropy in action. That is our universe falling apart. There is lots and lots of information that tie open book management with higher level of success. So it's time really to just get busy sharing with employees what's going on, and frankly, using that as an opportunity to communicate and to teach others how we make the business more successful. A second idea for your monthly meeting is to celebrate more. You've probably heard other people say this over the years, so let's just come clean. I'm in the baby boomer generation, and I grew up in business, if you will, without a lot of focus on celebration. My peer group and my generation was about sort of getting things done and kind of in a huffy, gruffy way oftentimes, and when we were successful, the context of that was, well, that's what you get paid for. So celebration didn't necessarily come naturally, and it doesn't come naturally to lots of folks today in my peer group who are the ones who tend to own and operate professional firms right now. So celebration has often been hard. That said, we have also brought lots of other people into our businesses who think differently. And in particular, we have the generation that my generation has raised has been a lot more focused on celebration, and I think quite positively. So I'm not making a sort of a negative connotation here. But there are lots of people in your firms now whose context is really, really different. That is, they're used to lots of communication. They're used to input. They're used to discussion, debate. They're used to participating. And they're used to celebration when things go well. And many firms, if not almost all firms, could benefit, I think, communications-wise, from taking a more explicit sort of approach to acknowledging the great stuff that's going on and celebrating that. Let's go to number 4. Again, remember I said at the beginning, action-oriented, tactical ideas, they're not sort of world beaters. I get that. This is real-world stuff, but you can pile these things up together and I think make a big, big difference in your organization. So number 4 here is to send out weekly project updates to clients. I've been doing this for a number of years for all clients and active projects. Every Friday, sometimes Monday, but every Friday, we send out this short email. It's a template with these 3 parts. This is what we did in the last week. This is what is planned for next week. Here are the current issues that are outstanding. This has gone a very, very long way, I think, towards differentiating the organizations I've been involved with from others that don't communicate as well. The truth is, of course, not all clients read these. I get that. Some read them in some detail, and lots of them don't read them very much, just like you and I have lots of emails that we don't read very closely. But here's the key point. Almost all of your clients will know that you sent it because we all scan down through the inbox to see what's there. And so part of what we're trying to do here is create an understanding that we are communications oriented. It's out there, it's available. Some will take advantage of it, some won't, but almost all will kind of credit you with the effort. So weekly project updates, I think, is an enormously important idea for that kind of active communication you're looking for. Top tip, number 5, collect some feedback. And I love that. I love this one because, you know, this is kind of a lot of how we think about communication in the business world. It's somebody yelling and screaming at us. It could be somebody inside the firm ordering us around to do something or giving us this kind of critical feedback on our performance. Or you can sort of look at this picture, too, as kind of this is the way the marketplace, unfortunately, often works, you know, with the service providers kind of yelling and screaming at you all the time. What I want to tell you is talking about, you know, collecting feedback from your clients. And so there are at least a couple of different ways of doing that. Organizations like Client Feedback Tool have platforms that allow us to collect feedback on an ongoing basis, kind of real time in the context of the project and the relationship that's happening right now. And that is enormously important and useful because it allows us to change directions and change outcomes. If we're getting feedback in real time, we can actually do something with that and do something about that. And again, as I've said already, it shows the commitment to the investment in the relationship. The very fact that you're asking constantly for feedback is a powerful message all by itself. Another kind of way of doing that is to collect information, feedback from your clients on a periodic basis, once a year or once every 2 years, where you sort of step back outside of or above the context of a particular project and think more about a relationship, about other things like the competitive context or the market context, and a chance to engage the client in a discussion about the bigger picture, if you will. So which of those is more important or more effective? My answer to that question is yes. Yes, you need both. And anything else you can think of, frankly, I think collecting feedback is a really important technique and a really important source for competitive advantage. I have a stopping place here for questions. Do we have any others here? I'm looking.
Yeah, John, we do have some questions. I've got two I'm going to connect here.
Okay.
It says, what are some ways that firms have made their weekly meetings more productive? And also, on those daily meetings, who should be in the huddle? So it's kind of meetings question.
Okay, good. Appreciate that. Daily huddles, the way I envision that is, what is my team? I have a team. That might be a project team of 3 people or 4 people, or I might think of that as the department, the structural engineering group, or a client team. I think the key here is team. Whatever the context is of the team you're working on, and many of you are also working on kind of inter-organizational teams too, right? So you have teams that involve contractors or partners or other people in the supply chain. The basic idea here is connecting the people who can benefit by connecting with one another. So just think about it in terms of team. And remember, the key there is short and sweet. We're not trying to solve big problems here. We're just trying to understand if there are any, and then that comes later. And that also helps me to kind of move into answering the second question, which is how do you make the weekly meeting more effective? I think one of the #1 things that you do is you understand that the weekly meeting is not for the kind of the solving of all of the problems. We used to say, and I think this is important, the weekly meeting is about figuring out what other meetings we need to have. So you're going to get a whole bunch of people together, typically it's all the project managers or all the people working on a particular project or a particular client. There's going to be a lot to talk about, especially if you're going to try to slam in kind of the business development activities as well. And what I like to do is have a very structured agenda, a hard and fast time limit, and a notion that all we're trying to do here is get through what's going on, what needs to happen, what other meetings need to go on, who do I need to meet with later, and that sort of thing. So very, very planning oriented. Sally?
Thanks, John. We have a couple of other questions if you have time. One it says, I've heard of open books, but we don't do that at our firm. Do firms really share all that information with their staff?
Open books. Well, the short answer is yes. There are many organizations which share almost virtually everything, with only really infrequent exceptions. And of course, you can think of some of the things that you wouldn't share that are sometimes inappropriate, details about mergers and acquisitions, details about particular employee files. People will often say, for instance, we shouldn't share salary information. Of course, but I've also worked with organizations who have such transparent accounting systems that if you want to, you can figure out what everybody's salary is pretty simply by looking at sort of project billing rates and things like that. And I just coincidentally heard on the radio just the other day about an organization who has become extraordinarily transparent about how much they pay to people. Again, I think the important point there is when you don't share information, people make it up. Human beings can't operate without that contextual kind of understanding. So we have to kind of connect the dots one way or the other. And we tend to be in the work environment negative and cynical, unfortunately. And so we sort of make it up in a negative way. If you're afraid to, let's say, for instance, if you're a principal and you're sort of afraid to share with your staff how much money you make as an owner of the firm, my experience is they think it's more already. So, and if it's not, then maybe you've got a different problem there that you need to deal with. So, yes, companies do share lots of information, and as I alluded to a little while ago, by and large, those kinds of companies with real open book, transparent books are more successful, more profitable. Sally?
Thanks, John. Last question for the moment, I guess. How often would you recommend collecting the periodic type feedback from your clients?
Well, I think it's a really good habit to get into, and so I'd like to see more organizations doing that on an annual basis. I think part of it depends on scale. So how big is your firm and how many clients do you have? It's pretty easy. I'm sure most of you feel this way too, that you can kind of get survey fatigue. Internal and external surveys, people increasingly want to know more of that kind of stuff, so you can kind of overdo it. What I'd like to see the organization do more is kind of split their clients up into groups and get in the habit of doing that on an ongoing basis. So I would say annually, maybe not all, you don't have to do all of your clients, do a group of them, but I think you would want to keep in touch with them as often as you can. So if you could survey all or most of your clients each year and or every other year, I think that is a really, really good frequency. And also in the context of doing this other kind of feedback, this sort of ongoing project-related feedback, I think that's really, really critical as well. And the advantage of the ongoing style is that it becomes, sort of much more systematically systematic in involving more people in the organization. So, so that's another key. It's like how many people. It's not just something the marketing department does, but we want to get lots of people involved in this, because ultimately we're talking about communication. Sally?
That's it for now, John.
Okay, let's go to then the second group of 5 terrific tips. And number 6 is kind of a notion that I think is easy to put into action, but start with sort of the idea. It's what I call my third law of business development success. Relationship first, project second. Now, when you see that and think about it, of course that makes sense. But let me tell you, you and I act completely differently most of the time. We think about projects first, relationships second. Why else would you let business development be driven by RFPs, by what's on the fax machine or used to be on the fax machine? We think about projects. When we interact with our clients and prospective clients, what we're thinking about is, do you have any work for me? That's kind of ingrained there, but it's selfish. And remember, self-orientation is inversely correlated with trust. Trust comes through building relationships first and then getting to the projects. And when we are kind of hardwired to find the work in this kind of muddle of relationships, we're missing that key point. So how do you build relationships first? By interacting with people, by investing ahead, by checking in, by talking, by networking, by sending stuff to your clients and providing value. It's what we're doing today. We're providing a webinar so that we can communicate with one another, so that we can learn from one another. Here's kind of the proof, I think, of how important that is. And this sort of looks like a busy chart, but it's pretty simple. The idea is the career progression of a professional, and as their business development acumen grows, that is their ability to develop relationships with clients, their value to the organization also grows. So kind of think about this generically. This is how careers develop. We all start sort of at the lower left, and we begin working on projects, and we have titles like engineer, architect, or analyst. And then at some point, a portion, a group, a subset of all of those professionals learns how to build relationships, which lead to work. And that happens at a time, and as a result of that, those people sort of move up, if you will. They become project managers or account managers or designers or consultants in the business world. And then later still, a group of those, a subset of those, gets even better at relationship building, if you're following along with me. And at that point, they can not only keep themselves sort of busy and fed, but do that for other people in the organization. This should sound like a familiar progression to you, but maybe you haven't thought about kind of the end game here, or the punchline, if you will. But it turns out in almost all professional firms that the people who are the best at building relationships, at winning work, and keeping the firm busy, these are the people who end up owning and running the companies. Have you ever thought of that? That is, the chief business developer is often the owner, the CEO, the managing principal. In technical organizations, they're almost never run by a chief technical officer. Isn't that interesting? So our ability to build relationships and communicate with others is at least as important as is executing and doing the work itself. And frankly, I think it's more important. Number 7, start a conversation with the market. So if you will, number 6 was about kind of business development on a personal level, building relationships with people. And number 7 is communicating to the marketplace itself. That's kind of the function of marketing. Now, those of you who are paying any attention to this will know that marketing is undergoing a true revolution today, a transformative, disruptive change that is really, really different from anything we've seen in a really long time, in 100+ years. This transformation that is happening in marketing is astounding. Philip Kotler said almost 15 years ago that markets were changing faster than marketing. That's an important concept, and if anything, it has accelerated exponentially since then. Markets are changing so fast that marketing must also change, and it isn't really today keeping up, which is why we have lots of, if you will, lots of experimentation going on, lots of people saying, well, this is what you need to do to be a successful marketer. This works, that doesn't work. It is a messy place today, trying to figure out how it is that we have a conversation with a marketplace that then leads to the kind of opportunities we want. But what we can say at the heart of this change is as Jeff Gitomer has said, people don't like to be sold, but they love to buy. People don't like to be sold, but they love to buy. What's going on kind of down at the foundational level is that information and technology and globalization are together leading to choice. And choice is leading to consumer power in ways that we just haven't really experienced. We've had this sort of long period now that you could associate with the technological revolution and the complexity of marketplaces and kind of the rise of the corporation, if you will. That's kind of what's characterized the last century or so. And those corporations, the sell side of the marketplace, the providers, the suppliers, the manufacturers, they controlled everything, including the conversation, the timing, the choice, and such. And all of that is shifting now to a consumer-oriented. And that's why, you know, many of your clients are beginning to think differently, are beginning to act differently, to do their own research, to begin to look at. And if they're not doing that today, it's simply because you're working in a protected market. But that change is coming. Now, what isn't changing fundamentally about the nature of a transaction is that value has to be in the center between you and I doing business, doing commerce together. So that hasn't changed. All potential customers and consumers, everyone in the world interacting with everybody else is interested in this one thing. So what? What's in it for me? Why are you different? Why should I care? So what? That's all that really matters, and that really hasn't changed. What's changing is, how do I get my point across? How do I share with you my value proposition? Here's an example. Charles Revson, the founder of Revlon Cosmetics, said, in the factory we make cosmetics in the drugstore, we sell hope. I want you to think about that for a minute and think about your messaging. You know, a cosmetics firm is really a chemicals company. If you go and show up at their facilities, you see, you know, that kind of stuff. Manufacturing, chemicals, stuff being put together, all of that. But Revson understood that really wasn't the business, was it? The business, that was the features of the business, if you would, not the benefits. You have to think about what you do in terms of why the client cares. You got to talk less, if you will, about architecture, about structural engineering, about a certain kind of bridge type. You need to think more in terms of what the client cares about. And, you know, it's a hard lesson for all of us to learn, but the reality is almost nobody cares about your discipline, about your expertise and experience there. They care about getting their thing done, and in the way they think about it. And that's it. That's what it's fundamentally about, communicating your value proposition in their terms. Today, lots and lots of folks are talking about the ways you do this as a professional, you know, being a guru, being a thought leader. Now, look, that's not really any different than it always has been. The difference is, because expertise is always counted as for professional, but the difference is, if you go back to my sort of picture of the high school gymnasium, it's that everybody is yelling and screaming more than they used to, and you can't simply sit there and hope that somebody picks you from across the room. You got to have something to say. And, you know, this bar is rising, folks, all the time, the quality of your content. If you're in an organization today, and let me just say this as clear as I can, if you're in an organization today that is mostly still arguing about whether or not thought leadership is the right strategy, then I believe you're really missing the boat. What the argument ought to be about is how to make our thought leadership remarkable. You know, not that whether or not we should do this or not, but how do we break through all of the noise? How do we provide information that's connected to our business? How do we talk about civil engineering in a way that is not only relevant and useful and interesting, but also, you know, entertaining, thought-provoking, controversial? It breaks through. That's the big challenge in communicating in the marketplace today. And finally, one thought about where you could start with that. It's what I call target market number one. And I've just been, frankly, astonished over the years how little effort can be put into marketing to target market number one, which is the internal team, as I think about it. In other words, I think all good communicating organizations, all good marketing-oriented organizations should start first with training themselves, their own people. Here's what we do. Here's what's different about us. Here's what you need to know. Here's how you can help connect the dots between others inside our firm and outside our firm. You know, you can't ask your staff to contribute to the show, as Disney says, the show of our marketing operations. You can't be an evangelist for our firm if you yourself don't know anything about what we do and how we do it and why we're different. So start your conversation inside with target market number one. Okay, we're at the top tip number 8. You probably heard some of this before, but we have a communications platform which sort of is composed of all of the various channels and vehicles and kind of the whole system and structure about how we get to the marketplace. And you're probably already in the midst of this or struggling with it or wrestling it, but today we need a complete rethinking of what platform is. It's no longer good enough, in my view, to communicate only with that small group of, that handful of existing clients that have provided most of our business over the last 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years or more. We have to be thinking about a different dynamic in the marketplace. Where do the customers of tomorrow come from? And as I alluded to a little while ago, I don't think anybody really knows the answer. This is a very much a kind of experimental situation. We know that we have all kinds of options on social media. Some will work, some will not work, some won't be here in 5 years. But I believe all effective organizations today are experimenting with these various things. And all I can say is, if the conversation in your firm is more about whether or not we should be on social media, for instance, then I think that's the wrong place to be. In other words, instead what you should be doing is arguing sort of where and how. What do we put on it? How do we know Facebook is going to help us with our business? The simple answer to that is you don't. You don't know that. What you do know is that some organizations are using Facebook to great advantage, and there are over 1 billion people paying attention to that. So is it worth experimenting a little bit? I think so. We're rapidly moving to a world where everything is sort of video-based or mobile-based. And so we've got to have people in our organizations that are experimenting not just with content, with how to make remarkable content, but then the vehicles, the platforms for distribution of that content. I know it's frustrating, especially when your organization model is, I'm willing to do anything if I'm sort of really confident that it's going to be productive, and I measure my billability and keep that really high. That's what's worked in the past. I just believe our fast future world is becoming so much more uncertain that it's going to be really hard to only do the kinds of things that we know ahead of time are going to be successful. You need to have more people experimenting in the company, and frankly, I think the people that need to be experimenting with these new forms of communication need to be the people who already know and understand this. So that implies to me, a younger group of people, people who use these tools already in their lives, that sort of thing. Number 9, building relationships, specifically networking. When you hear that word networking, what is your gut instinct? First of all, it has the word work in it, doesn't it? Why is it that networking is work? Why is it that it is so hard? Here are a couple of pictures. So you go to these networking events, and for many of us, of course, it's challenging. It's challenging to get somebody else's attention. It's challenging because it's sort of an uncomfortable. It's challenging because so many of us went to work in these industries and these professional disciplines because we didn't want to talk to people. We wanted to do work. And so having to get out there and sort of mix it up with other people is challenging. Another thing that's happening today is that everybody is distracted by other stuff, by smartphones and all of that. I get it. I've been there myself. I think there's some very specific techniques that you can use to become a better networker. I don't have a lot of time to go into those today, but happy to share those with some of you later on. But, part of it is just thinking about this as something other than work. And I'll give you a specific recommendation in just a minute. Networking can be even worse. It can be, kind of like this picture in a bar, right? Like this is where you have to network, and the risk of failure is really high. Or here are the pictures of the nerds over here that kind of don't fit into that. So those are the pictures. The question is, why not this? Why isn't it net play? Have you ever thought about that? In fact, in our business world, in our maturing society, what we do is we teach young people, usually about a 3rd or 4th grade, to stop playing. We teach people to stop having fun and to get serious and to grow up. And that is unfortunate because networking fundamentally, and hear me on this because this is super important, networking is fundamentally about sharing your passion with other people. And that's all it is. And I know that each and every one of you who's listening today is passionate about something. And lots of you are passionate about your work. So you are an engineer because that's what you really love. You're a designer because that's where that's where you get all of your energy from. So networking is not about finding business. It's not the pressure of finding somebody to dance with on the other side of the floor. It's more about sharing your passion. This is who I am. The problem is that when you do that, you go through people who aren't interested in your passion, people who aren't interested in you, and that can feel like rejection, but it shouldn't. So here's my strategy. Here's my tip for you for better networking, for building relationships. Spend some quality time, and this is hard. So you can spend a day working on it now, and you can keep working on it, over and over and over again, and it's hard work. But get your message together. What people would call the elevator speech. But basically, when you have that together, when you can interact with another individual and say, look, this is who I am and who I work for and what we do and how we do that, that part's easy. But then you can bore right in and say, look, this is what makes me different, this is what makes us different, and this is why it matters to people, this is why it matters to clients. When you can get your head and your arms wrapped around that notion, that message, that kind of script, then you can go anywhere. And all you're trying to do is bounce into individuals, different people, share your passion, and find some people who agree. And it's not that bad, and it's very, very critical. The fourth law of business development success. My third law was relationships first, project second. My fourth law is simply to go first, add value, expect nothing. So you have your message together, and then you have this. If you have this ethic, this ethos, that is, I'm going to go out and invest in other people. I'm going to take the first step. I'm going to send you something of value. I'm going to share some of my expertise with you. And I'm not going to think about that in a transactional way. Like I shared some information with you today on this webinar, and therefore I'm going to sit here and wait till you call me back and give me some money. That's not how it works. That is not how it works. You have to go first, add value, expect nothing. Share stuff with other people, invest in other people, make their lives better, more meaningful, more successful. And when you do that, in the aggregate, the payoff comes. Not transactionally, but in the aggregate. Word gets around. People remember. People invest in you, et cetera, et cetera. So it's relationships first, and it's going first and adding value. And finally, number 10, I want to suggest that you look at what I call your communications architecture. And that's sort of my fancy way of saying what you need to do is think about all of the communications techniques and tactics and tools and processes. What is it that you do in your firm that falls into the bucket of communications? Meetings, events, reports, memos, all of that, training, all that kind of stuff. What do we do daily? What do we do weekly? What do we do monthly, quarterly, semi-annually, annually? Follow me? So all those things, write all that down. Draw out a chart. Put it up on the whiteboard. This is how we communicate in this firm in all of our different ways. In my experience, when you do that, when you describe what some people would call the social operating system of your organization, two things happen. One, you find the gaps. You say, wow, when I stand back and look at this, what I'm seeing is, we do a lot of stuff with this sort of short-term frequency, but we're not very strong on the annual stuff or in the mid-range. So one thing you see when you write it all down and chart it all out, if you will, is where the gaps are. The other thing that happens is you uncover the differences in reality from your expectations or from your plans. So So, for instance, you say, okay, these are all the things we do, and we say, and one of those is we say we have project management training here every year. And you look at that, and somebody in your firm says, well, we haven't done that in a long time. We haven't done that in 3 years. And you think, well, that's right. That's right. There was the recession, and there was the so-and-so left, and we kind of lost the handle on that. So the second thing you often see is we think we're doing this, but we're really not. We say we have a monthly review, but we really haven't had one in 3 months now because of this and this and this. You follow me? So chart out your communications architecture, your social operating system, and look to see where can we make this better. Where is it working? Where is it not? It's institutionalizing a little, and I'm not arguing for bureaucracy. I'm just arguing for putting a little bit of structure in so that we can understand where to get better. Sally, I'm at another break here for questions. I don't know if anything has come in here.
Yes, there is a lot of stuff with social media questions. You know, how do you know what works? How do you decide where to put your energy? Another one related to that I'll throw in is, you know, we have a blog, but it's hard to find writers, and we're not even sure if anyone reads it. What do you suggest?
Yeah. You know, when I talk to and work with marketers in the professional world, that's probably one of the most common things that I hear as kind of a disconnect. That is, we have talented professionals in the marketing discipline, but they're not the content people. So they have to engage folks in the firm in order to get the story out of them. And that's hard to do when those technical folks, those design folks and such are busy doing what they do. So part of the answer here is, you know, part of what I'm talking about today is trying to reorient the professional himself or herself to think about communication, about business development as a core function of the job. In other words, so, you know, I want the engineer, the architect, the environmental consultant, the planner. I want those people to be thinking more in terms of I need to be successful. I need to be engaged myself. This is something that I should do. For the organization, you know, my strategy is always to tell people is find some champions inside the organization. So you've got, let's say you've got 6 different people who are really kind of subject matter experts, and 1 or 2 of those is interested in helping you, and 1 or 2 are not, and maybe 1 or more of them is almost openly in rebellion. Just work with the people who you can work with and make progress with and demonstrate success with. That's kind of the right way, I think, to do that. It is a challenge, part because we're set in our ways and there's a lot of change that needs to happen and it's slow going. So, you know, on the other hand, and then kind of to answer the other piece of that, again, I don't know. I'm not the right person, I don't think, to say you should use Twitter, but not Facebook, or you should use Pinterest if you're, you know, really into design kinds of things. And more importantly, I'm not sure there is anybody like that, because I've heard many experts make those kinds of prognostications only to come back in a year or 2 and say that I was completely wrong about that, or they don't say that, but it's obvious they were. So again, I think the best thing to do is experiment. You gotta do some looking around. You know, there's some really, I think, interesting discussions, for instance, going on in LinkedIn groups. I think that's cool. There's some people who are doing some really neat stuff with Pinterest, you know, and showing kind of visually pictures of what they do. I know firms that have very effectively used YouTube videos to not only share with people how certain things are done, but also share a bit of who they are through the doing. So There's a lot you can do. It can be a bit overwhelming. It takes a while to gain some traction. So, the first day you publish your first blog, this is certainly true for me, do you have any readers? Is there anybody paying attention to it? Takes a lot of time and effort. Over the long haul, here's what I'll say just to end this. Over the long haul, what matters most is remarkable content. I think if you have something to say and it's interesting and it answers the so what question, then eventually you're going to get traction. Sally?
Thanks, John. Can you share a little bit more about what you mean by social operating system in the context of communication?
Well, just simply kind of a documentation of all of the things that we do in our firm that fall under the category of communications processes and techniques. And I've shared this recommendation in person with enough people to know that there can be kind of a gut instinct like, oh, that's not going to be productive. Why would we want to do that? And yet it's a pretty simple technique. Just sit down and write down on the board. And I've seen over and over again, you just start writing all the stuff down, and you remember, oh, that's right, we were going to do that. We were going to have that meeting, but we haven't had it. How come we haven't done strategic planning here in the last 6 or 7 years? I thought that was something, just the whole process of thinking, well, what's involved today is helpful in designing and planning for a better system. So that's all I mean. Communications architecture, social operating system, simply what is the body of stuff that we do today to communicate the important stuff both inside and outside our firm. Okay?
Thanks, John. We can move on if you want.
Okay. All right, let's end now then with part 3 here and talk about action, because taking action and executing, I think, is so critical. But let me first say, and maybe this goes without saying, but I don't think so, you don't have to do anything. Ed Deming said many years ago, change is not necessary, survival is not mandatory. So you don't have to agree with my worldview. That's okay. I said that up front. I think you should have one. And you should sort of invest in pursuing success in that context that makes sense to you. Obviously, I think that change is super necessary because the change around us is demanding it. Let me think with you just a minute about risk, because I think this is a part of the problem or the challenge in organization. So if I show you these two pictures and ask you the question, which is more risky? It's quite likely that many of you watching the presentation here would say, that's pretty obvious. The risk here is on the left. It's riding the motorcycle. I could hurt myself doing that. Now, the roller coaster might not be fun. I might get sick doing it. And although people do get hurt on roller coasters occasionally, it's not very often. It's pretty safe. So if I think about risk in terms of that, in terms of how do I hurt myself, then it's pretty clearly which of the two is the riskiest. But if I redefine the challenge, if I redefine the problem and ask you instead to think about risk in terms of flexibility, adaptability, about change and going to where you want to go, and then ask you, take a look at these two pictures and tell me which is more risky. Do you get it? The motorcycle is a vehicle I could use to go somewhere else, to go somewhere I want to go. So while it's unlikely that I'm going to get hurt on the roller coaster, it's also extraordinarily unlikely that I'm going to end up somewhere else other than the bottom of the ride. So that's what I think we should be thinking about in our organizations. Part of the big risk that we face today is not the I'm going to get hurt risk, which, let's say, if I use the analogy, would be something akin to, not getting work or not being, my clients going away. The kinds of things that I've been worried about for a long time that are very real risks. But instead, what happens if the world passes me by? What happens if there are game changers, disruptions in our business, in our industry, and we're kind of riding on this roller coaster, but we are no longer going to the right place? Are you with me? That is something that I think you need to ask. You want to make a positive change. You want to become a better communicating firm. You want to become a firm that communicates really well, or, as I suggested at the beginning, that you fundamentally are a communications firm doing your discipline. I think the obvious first step often in the organization context is to just start over, to hit that reset button and say, let's stop thinking about and fretting over what we haven't done, what happened in the past. And too often we have so much trouble letting that go. But that's a key. Just start over. Just forget about it. Just move forward from today. You don't need to document why we didn't have open books in the past. You don't need to explain or defend the way the project management meeting has been for the last 17 years. Forget it. There's no value in that. Punch the reset button and let's go forward. Then moving forward, take Yogi Berra's advice here. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. When you come to a fork in the road, take it. Too often, technical professionals in particular spend too much time analyzing, not taking action. When you're staring at this fork in the road, the notion that there is a right way and a wrong way, which is a kind of a paradigm that makes a lot of sense in your discipline, in engineering and architecture. Well, particularly I think in engineering, I'm thinking there's a right way and a wrong way, and when you do it the wrong way, things sort of fall down, they break, they wear out, they don't last. That is not I don't believe, the right or accurate paradigm in business. In business, there are lots of potentially right answers and some wrong ones, but it's usually not a real black and white thing. So to stand there at your fork in the road, trying to decide through more and more critical analysis which is the perfect way versus the less perfect way, it just isn't helpful. What counts is action. So move on. How do you get things done as an individual and then as an organization? It is a function, as this chart tries to show, of both knowledge and effort. Let me explain this really briefly. There are people in your organization, and let's use your organization kind of as an example of a group, because this is true in all kinds of groups of all kinds of sizes. There are different sorts of people on this chart. So there are some, maybe 10%, up to maybe 10% or so, the people in your organization or in your group who really lack the required knowledge for success. They're kind of below the threshold, and they lack the effort. They lack in both dimensions. And these people are in a really bad spot. They are the square pegs in a round hole, the people that just don't fit in. They're what I call the walking undead, or the zombies. These are folks that cannot be successful in the current context unless something changes. And our job as leaders is usually to help these people find a different position. And not to be too harsh, but sometimes that's in the company and sometimes it's outside the company. But that's kind of there are some of those. There's also a group of people that really is just kind of lacking in the knowledge that they really need to be successful, to get things done. But they work really hard, what I call the laborers, the workaholics. These are the folks that put in lots and lots of hours, but they don't use the technology that you give them. So they won't learn the new video conferencing system, or they won't use BIM, in the way. And so they're missing the opportunity to be a lot more successful because the knowledge is what's missing. So if they're sort of 10% in the first group, there might be 20% in the second group. But the biggest group, and research shows this over and over again, the biggest group, and therefore kind of the biggest challenge, if you will, maybe half of the people in the organization or in this group have the requisite knowledge but don't take or make the effort necessary for success. So these are the pundits, I call them, the spectators, the people on the sidelines. These are people like you and I oftentimes who will take in a webinar like we're doing this afternoon, get an idea or two that might work, and then not do anything with it. Does that sound familiar? Of course it does, because so many of us do that, even with really good intentions. We lack in taking the effort, the action. Now, the really important part of this slide, I think, is that you don't need knowledge in super abundant kind of guru levels, and you don't need effort that says, I work 80 hours a week and I don't do anything else with my life. What you need is a combination of knowledge and effort that is a little bit more than what's necessary, a little bit more than other people have, and that is what is needed to put you up into the extraordinary category. Have you ever thought about that? To be extraordinary means to be extraordinary. That means not just ordinary, but ordinary plus a little, ordinary plus something extra. We oftentimes set the bar too high. I believe that success in getting things done in your firm is really fundamentally about doing a few more things and about learning a few more things. Here's another key point. Henry David Thoreau said, not failure, but low aim is the crime. I think all too often we think that's what really is going to sink us is making a big mistake, a big failure. In reality, what tends to set us back all the time is that we never take action at all. So we muddle on through day to day, worrying about the small problems of today and not about the big issues or the big opportunities that lay ahead. So keep that in mind. You can make, I think, enormous improvements in your productivity and success as a person and as a firm by taking some of these ideas and putting them into incremental practice and getting a little better each day. The problem is we're just not aiming high enough. Totally terrific communication. It's a real opportunity, a real differentiator, a real chance for success. So I want to encourage all of you to take it. Sally?
Thanks, John. We do have a couple of questions, and I guess if anybody else has any questions, we have a few more minutes here. If you would type your questions into the question box, and we'll see how many John can get to. If we don't have time for all of them, John, maybe we can get you to answer them and we can send them out to folks.
Happy to do that.
So what I've got here already is...
And this is Ryan. Let me jump in. Hey, let me jump in a minute. We are coming up at the end of our time. I'm sure a few of you would love to stick around for questions. So let me just wrap up real quickly so we can stop the recording and turn loose those who need to, but would love to have the rest of you stick around for, I'm sure, some really compelling questions and answers. So again, thank you very much for taking time today, working with us. If any questions are not answered, I'm sure John will be following up with additional information to answer those questions. I know John also has some great content to support this webinar, so if your note-taking was a bit lacking because you were eating lunch, I'm sure John will be reaching out, sharing some of that information as well, so please do look for that. Also note, you will be receiving a feedback request from us about this webinar. You can expect us to follow up and reach out to any questions or comments you have there, so do look for some engagement from us just to make sure we're meeting your needs and continuing to craft and refine these educational events to your needs. Again, thank you so much. At this time, Sal, if you want to stop the recording, we can, and we'll turn it over for you to do the Q&A with John. Please keep the questions coming. I'm sure John will stick around and answer them until they're done. Thank you.